Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Democrats versus Republicans on November 5th, 2024, along with elected personnel up and down the ticket at the local, state, and federal level. The next president of the United States will be elected. Across the U.S., it is no question we have a divided country, fueling what has been termed as political violence. We recently witnessed it in Butler, Pennsylvania, with the attack on former President Donald Trump. The end result, former president was injured. In addition to the shooter, an innocent bystander was killed, and also 2 bystanders were injured. But what is fueling this political violence? With us today on Bets and Badges, we have Dr. Debbie Goodman, professor at St. Thomas University, and also, I like to say famed, TV criminologist, to discuss this issue. I am Robert Asencio, and beside me, beside Dr. Debbie, we have my co-host, retired police chief David Magnusson, and military historian. How are you, sir?
Great to be here. How are you all doing? Good?
Great. I'm so honored to be with both of you. Thank you so much.
Well, doctor, let's get right into it.
Yes, sir.
So what's fueling this political divide? Any thoughts?
Absolutely. Certainly thoughts as a criminologist as to why individuals would participate in any type of violence. We could always start with vigilante justice. And sometimes people think that they are proceeding in a manner that they feel they're entitled to. They're either saying it's their constitutional right to express themselves, or they feel that perhaps their ideology is not being heard in a manner in which they would like. So they take matters into their own hands. So certainly the three of us, given our backgrounds in criminal justice, we understand that mentality. And then we would also want to take a look at what we know in our field. It's called mens rea actus reus. And so really what that speaks to is the mens rea is the criminal mindset. Do we have intention? Do we have purpose? And if so, we continue into the actus reus piece, and that means the criminal act itself. So usually when both are combined, then we could point more toward, the individual knows what he or she is doing and knows what he or she is doing is wrong. So if we want to look at some of this in terms of singular issues that we've certainly experienced throughout history, and we could start with a John Wilkes Booth, right? Mm-hmm. And the assassination of President Lincoln. What we know about the rationale there, not that we're ever fully in totality understanding this mindset, but at least in part, maybe not always in full. But with Booth, we understand that he was very against Lincoln's posture and position on the abolishing of slavery. So his killing and assassinating of President Lincoln, we think, was really driven by that. He had a singular intent. It was a retaliatory action, and that's what he did. If we look at, let's say, Lee Harvey Oswald, killing of President Kennedy, Oswald had background as a Marine. So then we would have to wonder, was there something along the lines of a mental health concern? Was the mental acuity challenge? Was there PTSD of any sort? Or was it possibly just anti-establishment, anti-government sentiment? Perhaps. Next, we may want to look at John Hinckley, right? John Hinckley Jr. and President Reagan. So interestingly, the rationale we think on that particular circumstance is that he was so enamored by, infatuated with Jodie Foster. And as we recall, her involvement in the movie Taxi. Well, somehow Hinckley just became
Travis Bickle.
Right? Yeah. Just enamored by her to the point where we think that's the rationale as to why he wanted to potentially kill President Reagan, to actually garner the interest and the attention of Jodie Foster. And now we can bring it to present day, modern day, which Robert did such a great job at the intro and talking about the potential assassination of Donald Trump, and we look at this Thomas Crooks here, and what do we know? We know he was a loner. We know he was bullied. And what I find very interesting about that case, and both of you may be aware, but I think the viewers would find this interesting, is that Crooks on his cell phone, that's why we've got to love digital evidence, right? The cell phones, the computers. But who does he have a picture of on his cell phone? He has a picture of the shooter, Ethan Crumley, from the high school, Oxford High School, where Crumley in Michigan took the lives, sadly, tragically, of 4 young people. So why does Crooks have this picture of Ethan Crumley? And we know the outcome of Ethan Crumley, of course, is that he was prosecuted as an adult, even though he was 15 at the time, for life sentences. But why that case is also intriguing, I think, not only to us in criminal justice, but to our viewers, is that it became historic. Why? Because both Jennifer and James Crumley, as the parents, you recall, what do they get charged with? Manslaughter, because they did not intervene. So these are all, I think, interesting threads and little nuggets along the way. What role does the parent have in shaping the young person's behavior?
So let me jump in here because God, it's like I feel like I'm back in class. Dr. David.
Well, that's what they call me, the TV professor. We're teaching and learning, and yeah.
But David, you and I and other guests have spoken about the historical piece and the connection now. You brought up about the two, what was it, within 1 month's time, former President Gerald Ford.
Correct.
There were 2 attempts on his life, and you brought up the points about. Why don't you bring some context to that, because I want to get to the mindset and the impact that these incidents are occurring.
Couple things that you're talking about, which I find interesting. You talked about Booth. You ended it with Crooks.
Yeah,
they were the only 2 that weren't taken into custody.
You're right.
Now we know Booth's motivation. I mean, that's obvious. Southern sympathizer. We don't know Crooks. To be fair on these active shooters and these serial killers, the active shooter types, they seem to always pay homage to people before.
Correct.
I mean, you could look how many times people have quoted Andres Brevin from Norway when he did the diversion bombing in Norway, then went out to that island and killed, 70 kids or something?
Yes.
On a Christian, they were out on a Christian meeting out there, right?
Right.
So I find that extremely important. I also find what's important is the conspiracy angle. For instance, you mentioned, and you're probably right, Oswald, okay, Marxist, even the Soviets says, you may want to take him back, something like that. He was that out there. And we can never come to grips that somebody like that, and I can think of a lot of adjectives to use on somebody like that, took out a great man.
Yes.
But because he took him out, here come the conspiracy theorists, because Hinckley was just as messed up.
He was.
But since nobody died, there's no conspiracy theory.
Interesting.
And, one fuels the other, right?
Good point.
I mean, you got Crooks. The only other president was Kennedy with a high-powered rifle, and Martin Luther King.
Sure.
So usually it's up close and personal with a handgun.
Yes.
There's a lot of things here that, I mean, we can sit here all day and talk about it. It's fascinating.
It really is.
And then the other 2, the other assassinations with Garfield and McKinley. One was an anarchist, the one that killed McKinley, and the other one was kind of upset because he thought you could walk through the White House back then. He was supposed to get a job. He was going to get a job, some sort of job, and be an ambassador to another country. It didn't quite work out, so he figured if he takes him out, he puts in a stalwart Chester Arthur, the VP. Now he'll get a job.
Very good.
Yeah,
that was excellent.
But at the end of the day, there's so much to discuss on the violent portion of it.
Yes.
I mean, some we can explain away. With Crooks, I'm not so sure at this point we can. We're missing something.
According to the FBI and the Bureau of Justice Statistics, crime is down. And crime is going down, both the reported crime to the police and the unreported crime that is researched. Violent crimes are going down, but this new phenomena, if you will, this resurgence, and the U.S. has had a history with political violence, right, is on the rise. What's the impact on not just our community, but the first responders who are responsible for ensuring the safety at events like what we just saw in Butler, Pennsylvania? How does that impact them?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Well, first and foremost, let me say not only to both of you directly, but to the audience members who are affiliated with local, state, and federal law enforcement and our first responders, how appreciative as a citizen I am for your fine work and your diligent efforts and all that you do and have done and continue to contribute. I think, unfortunately, we will go through peaks and valleys of time where people don't necessarily appreciate and value our law enforcement officials. And I think we might be teeter-tottering on some of that, only because, as Robert is referencing, FBI data and DOJ, our Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Statistics, and such, we are seeing a decline in the interest as well for young people to enter the noble profession and to want to be engaged. And maybe that's in part because of this anti-law enforcement sentiment. So now the question becomes, the second piece that Robert is bringing to the table for conversation is, what impact does that have on present law enforcement officials, on the future? Like my own students at the university, I'm always encouraging them to explore all levels of a potentially gratifying career. But I think people want to be appreciated, they want to be valued, they want to be respected. And that's important in our field because there's so much good work that's happening, but yet what are we reading about, hearing about? Not always the great work of the men and women of our wonderful field, but sometimes the negativity. And that becomes, the lead headlines and what media wants to run with. So I think it's a very delicate balance of our officials who really are doing superior work, but yet unfortunately just in part the ones who maybe have given the negative aspect, which is so minuscule too. When we talk about potentially 1 million officers as we speak in local, state, and federal work who do great work, and maybe the very few and far between who don't, but unfortunately sometimes our citizens want to just focus there.
You find it secular, though.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Because again, not dating either one of you, but I'm sure during the years that you were directly involved in service, hopefully you were acknowledged and recognized by the citizens for good work.
Yeah, I think, well, it's a contact sport, right?
It depends.
Let's leave it at that.
Okay.
After 9/11,
Yes.
you couldn't walk anywhere without being thanked.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Just the other day, and it goes back into the political realm, you're watching people masked up, not touching, but trying to stir the ire, get in the face of cops, putting the middle finger out to cops,
Yes.
hoping for a response. Now, we know those are professional agitators looking for a response, and the best
Sure.
response is no response.
That's true, I believe.
But I think when people see that, they think they do have, regardless of party, they do have a deep appreciation of the law enforcement professionals.
Yes.
Professionals.
Yes.
Not the person that takes out the nightstick and starts wailing away. We can go back to 68 on that, but keeping it calm. It's a contact sport, but it's a thinking man's sport too.
It
you
really is.
have to think.
I agree with that too, because even as a professor, I value, our ability to think, to reason, to rationalize, even if in the most adverse of circumstances. But then as it relates to political violence, in these adverse circumstances, we have law enforcement officials, particularly if we want to discuss the insurrection, we had 5 people die, and some of whom were, Capitol police officers. So they were doing their very best, right, to protect and serve, and lost their lives.
A recent Pew Research poll showed that about over 80% of people believe, depending on what newscast you tune into, you'll get a different set of opinions or facts, right? Yeah. And because of that, that's where the conspiracies and things like that move forward. So as an administrator, you got to realize police are just a microcosm of the community. They're there to uphold the law. There could be demonstrations and counter demonstrations, but I think the bottom line is maintaining that professionalism and something that I think sometimes slips away, and it must never, neutrality, strict neutrality.
True.
You go home, take the badge off. You can carry signs and put them on your lawn. That's fine. It's got to be strict neutrality, starting from the top, or else you're really walking down a dangerous path.
Yes.
So are you training more, or are the other troops? I've been retired a little longer than you have.
Well, we can go back to 2003, the FTAA.
Yeah.
And
remember that well.
And remember that was based on the ramping up of it was based on how it went to heck in a handbasket in Seattle at the WTO in 1999. And it started off as an off-duty job. Well, it didn't quite end that way. And law enforcement for all South Florida, well-trained, well-versed, First Amendment all the way, but there's not going to be these acts of violence against property owners or, property businesses or against people. That's not going to happen. And I think you have to anticipate. You have to anticipate, but you have to push forward professionalism. And that's the word we're using, at all cost.
Always.
But there does come a time, and I've told my cops this too, you don't get paid to get hit. And I would expect if a cop gets hit, he fires back on. I say fire, hits back. You hit back. You don't get paid to take physical abuse.
Sure.
Verbal, you get paid to do it. And I suspect you should, and maintain that strong line of discipline. Yeah. Correct. Don't let people push your buttons. Mm-hmm. New game when somebody puts their hands on you.
Right.
And I'll stay there as a former police chief or law enforcement, very proud of it. Cops don't get paid to be attacked, and if and they need to respond back when that happens.
Absolutely.
And so, moving forward, in a nutshell of what you're asking, it's all about preparation. It's all about.
But training. Do you find that to be more presence of mind, presence of management now, in this day and age?
To anticipate.
Yeah.
Yeah, but a lot of things a lot of things happen where just go off. Right off the bat without any anticipation. Those are a little bit more difficult to manage at the onset. You grab control of it, but no, I think that's part of the game plan. Now you have to anticipate. You have to factor in these issues, First Amendment issues. And again, not go 1968 Chicago PD intensive, because you're never going to win. That it'll never ever look good, regardless what the issue is. What happened. So.
Right. And if I may add, as a professor, I also think, to piggyback on what David is saying about neutrality and professionalism, I always loved the NYPD motto, right? You walk into the lobby, CPR. So, of course, we value it and appreciate our first responders as it relates to the medical approach, but courtesy, professionalism, and respect. Mm-hmm. And in my humble opinion, it really shouldn't matter with whom we're interacting or speaking, whether it's a judge or a janitor, a student or a senator, a plumber, a politician. If we can, meaning us in the criminal justice field, always be the first ones to demonstrate that. But again, I absolutely agree with what you're saying. There's no reason why a local, state, or federal law enforcement officer should be mistreated or disrespected. And these agitators are out there to do just that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we had Richard Mack, a former lieutenant with NYPD. Mm-hmm. He was, I don't remember which bridge, crossing into the city.
It was the Brooklyn Bridge.
Was it the Brooklyn Bridge? Yeah. There were protesters on the bridge. The protesters were armed. In his case, his attacker had rings on each finger, so it created essentially brass knuckles.
Yeah.
Pummeled him to the point where he was disabled. He crushed his orbital socket. And incredibly, NYPD at that point showed immense restraint. Those individuals were not carried out in body bags, which was incredible. But let's go back to the markers, if you will, of political violence, the what's driving or fueling the political violence. So according to the Greater Good magazine, science-based insights for meaningful life, there are 7 factors that they attribute to being fuelers, if you will, for political violence: aggression, intense partisanship, identity, or government overreach. You believe that government's overreaching in your rights, what have you. Let's see. Disinformation, right? We all know about disinformation. And depression and stress that the community is feeling, that the individuals who are perpetrating these acts are feeling. Anger, contempt, and disgust. Okay? And then firearm possession. Ease of purchasing, especially high-powered weaponry. And then the last one that they attribute to this cause is, let's see, moralization and moral convergence. What are your thoughts Do you find that to be accurate, or
Yeah,
what do you add?
Right, absolutely. I appreciate that research, and a lot of times as a criminologist and professor, when I go on media platforms, I'm asked to come up also with a theory. So in anticipation of our conversation, I too have a theory in addition to all that you've said, and I'll just refer to it as CPA, Control, Power, Authority. And I think that whether we are looking at the group dynamic where 3 or more individuals become the participants, or if we go back to, the Oswalds and such, Crooks, and they're acting individually, I think there's this sense of they want to be in control. Maybe their own personal lives, they feel they're not in control. Could be at the workplace where they've been demoted or fired. So now that creates an identity issue. The power issue, did they have power and now somehow it's been usurped? And then ultimately some type of authority. I think when people are participating in these types of behaviors, again, whether it's singularly or in a plural context, I think those are some rudimentary things to think about: control, power, authority, that they desire, and they feel they are gaining this through, everybody knowing who they are. Even if we just mildly step aside from the political piece, but go into a mass situation, right? A mass murder, and here we are locally, and we know the Nicholas Cruz case. But if we recall, what did he say before, literally hours before this devastation of the 17 innocent lives and who perished in this? He said he wants everybody to know his name. So I think in part there's some sense of, and I never want to refer to these people, of course, as famous because they don't deserve that, but infamous. We will know their names because as soon as that tragedy took place and you start to Google and you just put his name and you didn't even need the full name, just the letter N, what comes up? Nicholas Cruz.
Well, I find it interesting too. We talked about Oswald, but looking at Hinckley, looking at Bremer, the guy that shot Wallace. Thing to keep in mind here, when you say wanted to make a name.
Yes.
Bremer was going after Nixon. And because there was so much people surrounding Nixon, I think wherever he was going to do it, there was just too much security. He decided Wallace. There was no rhyme or reason. You say, okay, maybe the guy hated Wallace. Hinckley was going to go after Carter. And he realized, his term is up. I'll go after Reagan. What about these people? Like, we don't know now. Crooks wants to make a name for himself. And you got the loner, no real footprint. Obviously, with Bremer and Hinckley, there was no, internet footprint, right? What's lurking over the horizon for people that want to make a name for themselves on a grand scale? And that would be the political. I mean, you look at, what is it, attacks on Congress people since 2015, how it has exploded. In just the amount, what has happened, and we can go back to the person I wanted to make a name that shot Gabby Giffords. I mean,
you're right.
I always say we don't know what lays before us on December 6th, on September 10th, on January 5th. We don't know what's coming that next day, and that's what's scary because there's a lot of people out there that I suspect subscribe to what you just mentioned.
I think so.
So for me, it kind of like creates a world of two realities. One is the individuals who are trying to make the name, right, the mark, but then also you have these lone shooters or these individuals who fall into the Secret Service type active shooter profile, that they are essentially playing it's almost like a video game where, if you have an incident yesterday or the last incident was the shooting of a school with 17 kills, horrible to say, 17 other victims, countless other walking injured. The next one has to top that. Is that what we're living in? Is that where we're at? Is that a fair way to describe what's, in layman's term, occurring here?
Well, I can certainly comment and say that I think there's concern about copycat killers and people who are willing to kill others and almost without regard for their own lives. It's almost like, okay, well, whether I live or I don't live, I'm still going to do what I want to do. And, even recently, again, we're talking about this Koberger out of Idaho, right? This is a PhD candidate in criminology, and he's alleged to have killed the 4 University of Idaho students. And honestly, I think as a criminologist, I think he thought he was so smart and manipulative that he was not going to get
100%.
caught. And I believe if he didn't get caught, I think he really would have gone on to be a serial killer.
Classic psychopath.
And he may
I
have
think
already
so.
killed, right? We don't know.
And he may have. But see, back to what David is suggesting and this whole idea of being known, being recognized. See, my theory on that is some of these people, I would call it the Lilliputian theory, right? And it relates to political violence and our, mass murderers and serial murderers, whereby Lilliputian, little. I think these people feel little. It has nothing to do with their stature, their height, their breadth and such, but mentally they're not recognized, they're not respected, they really don't garner any type of power, control, authority, and at some point it is like the volcano. There will be an eruption of their own conduct and misbehavior, and therein lies how and why we would know them. But they're okay with that. They want to be known, even if it's for something devastating.
Wow. A lot to say. We have a minute and a half left.
We still don't know what motivated the Vegas shooter. And that was a very
Stephen
impersonal.
Pollock.
That was a very impersonal from that distance. It wasn't like being in the same room or something.
Was it a 7th floor?
It was higher than that. He was just opened up with the bump stock and took out all those people at the concert. What was the motivation? We don't know.
We don't know.
And that's as scary as anything else.
True.
So in the last minute here, closing thoughts. Really, he's to be able to open it up for a future show.
Wow, well, I can't even believe
Follow-up.
the time went by so quickly, and such an honor to be with both of you and the viewers. And I think these are courageous conversations. That's how I would classify this, a courageous conversation to talk about political violence. We know there's a sensitivity aspect to it, but bravo to just, share the ideas, and certainly welcoming of viewers' responses, but I think it has to be continued. We don't want to shy away from what we know is important and things we have to consider moving forward.
Chief?
If we don't discuss it, doesn't mean it's not happening.
So
So we have to discuss it, and we have to let people know, listen, we don't know what's over that horizon. I mean, the taller we get, the higher up we go, we may be able to see further, and I think that's what we're trying to do.
Couldn't agree more. So we do know this. Crime is not going to stop anytime soon. We do know this, that for every crime that's solved, many more will go unsolved. So it is up to us to convey to you, the public, the real facts. This has been another show of Bets and Badges. If you would like to find us beyond the Miami's Community News Network, please go to betsandbadges.com, or you can find us on most podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, iHeart, Amazon, or Facebook, YouTube, and of course here at the Miami's Community News. On that note, to the Miami's Community News team, we can thank you, Grant, Michael, Miller. Really appreciate what you guys do. To our producer behind the scenes, Alex Sukas, we also equally thank you, and to you, the audience. We'll speak to you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.